welcome to the BoshNRoll channel. If you want to support my daily Eternal Magic offerings while getting amazing perks like the BoshNRoll Discord community, have me play your deck on the channel, or listen sideboard guides before tournaments, check out the Patreon or YouTube membership program. This channel is possible because of these amazing sponsors. Check them out, all their links are in the video description. As always, thanks for being here. Let's go play some Magic. Welcome back to the BoshNRoll channel. Today, I'm doing a tournament report from the NYSE Open 8, the vintage tournament that I've been promoting for the last several months on this very channel. And guess what? I won! The NYSE Open has been a prestigious, well-known vintage tournament in the vintage community for close to 15 years now. This is the 8th one that was run, but the last one was in 2019, so a few years were taken off. I started playing vintage in 2008. That's where I started to accumulate my duels and my format staples and started to become aware of the format, got my manadrain.com forum account. And NYSE Open has been just sort of a big, well-known tournament among vintage heads for most of the time that I've been aware of the format, or at least serious about the format. Back in those days, there was Vintage Champs, which has morphed into Eternal Weekend. And there was the Star City Power 9 series. And then there was NYSE and Waterbury. And those are kind of the four big vintage tournaments that I can think of in the US. Across the seas, over in France, there was Bazaar of Moxon. These are kind of the legacy, vintage, but, legacy in the dictionary use of the word. The legacy vintage titles that a vintage gamer can put on their resume. And this is the first NYSE I've been able to attend. I was much younger. I had less money. I lived far away. It was hard for me to get to these things. And this is the first one I've been able to attend, and it exceeded expectations. NYSE and the organizer, Nick Detweiler, it's been known, and Nick has been known, to really want to put on an incredible show for vintage players to be part of. He wants big prizes. He wants Power 9. He wants workshops. He wants Bazaar of Baghdad's. That's the sort of thing he wants moving around. He doesn't want to run like a store credit 5K that just happens to be vintage. He wants to make an experience for vintage players. And that's what I got. Being able to play for a first prize Black Lotus in 2024 is so insane. I thought this was an impossible dream. I thought this era had passed. Black Lotus for first, 7 other pieces of power, everything except Ancestral Recall was given away to the top 8 of this event. That prize pool, it is more money than Eternal Weekend. What you can sell in Eternal Weekend painting for fluctuates, maybe the total value, depending on the year, Eternal Weekend might outpace this, but as far as what you could walk away with in value on the day, this is the highest value vintage event I've ever played in. And I want to take a second to shout out Nick Detweiler, who is the TO. That's at Nick Detweiler on Twitter. If you are interested in future NYSE Opens or providing feedback on this one, Nick has invited me to invite you to reach out to him, or at least follow him on socials so you know where things are going to happen next. Winning this tournament, it not only is a Black Lotus, which it is, by the way. Here it is. There is the Black Lotus that I won in this tournament in hand. Not too shabby looking. Also got this sick Karn Silver Golem altar. He's hanging out at Yankee Stadium. So it says NYSE Open 8 winner on the bottom. It's a beautiful card that I will own forever. Also this trophy that I'm holding in the picture that I can't show you right now because it's not here, because it was too big to fit in any piece of luggage that I brought with me. Shout out to Nick for going above and beyond on that too. It should be shipped to me shortly. But in addition to all that dope stuff, having the title of NYSE Open winner means a lot to me as somebody who's been invested in the vintage community for going on 20 years now. All of that sentimental stuff said, let's get on to the actual matches and my deck. This video is sponsored by Moxfield.com, the easiest way to build Magic decks online. Moxfield supports over 30 formats, including Legacy and everything else you'll see on this channel. There's multiple customizations so you can interact with your deck how you want. Views such as text, grid, or stacks. And groupings like type, subtype, color, color identity, even artist. The site offers light mode, dark mode, and so much more. However you want to see your deck, Moxfield can provide it for you. Follow my Moxfield to keep up with the channel and what I'm playing in paper. I'll see you there. For this tournament, I registered Oath of Druids. To the surprise of maybe someone, but this is the deck that I registered for both Eternal Weekends and the NYSE trial I played in. Every time I've had to play Serious Vintage for the last 8 months, I've been playing Atraxa Oath. And this was a bit of a journey because Modern Horizons 3 just came out. And Modern Horizons 3 gave Jewel Shops multiple upgrades to their deck. And Jewel Shops is the matchup I hate the most when I'm playing Oath. I think Doomsday is probably a worse matchup than Jewel Shops is, but I really hate Jewel Shops, and like it's comparable, and I also just hate it. So it feels worse for me. Jewel Shops eliminated me from my win and in Prague Eternal Weekend. It eliminated me from the top 8 in America Eternal Weekend. It eliminated me from the top 8 of my NYSE trial event that I got to play in this season. I have a tough history with Jewel Shops, and the deck just got better. That put me into a soul search, a deck search, that you will see unfold on this channel over the next couple weeks. I recorded a bunch of the leagues that I played with a bunch of different decks. There's a Doomsday League coming, there's a Grixis Breach League coming, and eventually there's an Oath League coming, where I'm just like, I'm not happy with these other things. I'm going to try Oath again and just see how it feels. And the answer is it felt really good. And then I decided to just go with Oath instead of trying a new deck. What I did to justify Oath to myself is, if Jewel Shops is level 0 of this is clearly the deck that's performing the best online and people are going to play it, the next step, level 1, to counter the level 0 of Jewel Shops are decks like Bug, decks with Force of Will and Collector Roof in high numbers in the main deck, decks like White Initiative that have Archon of whatever thing, Archon of Emeria. I almost said Cruelty, that's the wrong Archon. Archon of Emeria and Thalia, and ways to just stuff Jewel Shops. Various off-meta hate bear strategies that can main deck Null Rod. Prison or aggro shops that can main deck Null Rod. These are all things that make sense if you're expecting a field full of Jewel Shops. And you know what deck is really good against every single deck I just listed? Oath of Druids. So if level 1 is beating level 0, then level 2 is beating level 1. But if I went too high up the level system, and it turned out to be just a level 0 field, I would be in trouble. So to cover the gap of what if I'm wrong on what the level I'm on, I used every single flex slot that the Oath deck has to target faster combo decks. And what we've got here are 2 Thoughtseizes and a Null Rod in the main. These 3 slots here. In other Oath decks, this might be Lotus Petal, a card that gets countered by Vexing Bauble and does not help me in Jewel Shops matchups. Flusterstorm, a card that doesn't have very many targets out of Jewel Shops. Gaia's Blessing, a card that I really like to be able to grind with through tougher matchups, but it doesn't help you win. It just helps you not lose if a matchup gets grindy, which is not what a Jewel Shops metagame is really about. Though Gaia's Blessing is really good, if you stick your first Atraxa and then Jewel Shops copies it with Phyrexian Metamorph, and you need to just fire Oath into Oath into Oath to try to grind through the value that they're getting off copying your Atraxa, I actually really like Gaia's Blessing there. So that one was a card I thought about a lot. I've seen Veil of Summer in this slot. I've seen Yawgmoth's Will in this slot. Just a lot of other things I could have done with these 3 slots here. And I decided to go with hard counter for fast combo. Because not only Jewel Shops is a tough matchup for Oath, any faster combo deck is historically tough on Oath. Basically any deck with Dark Ritual in it you don't want to play against. And Thoughtseizes are very good against any Dark Ritual deck, including Doomsday. And then Null Rod is good against any other Dark Ritual deck except for Doomsday. And these slots just targeted that. And then in the sideboard, I have a Steel Sabotage and a Nature's Claim that I've never played before in this list in any of my previous big tournaments. And those are both specifically because of Vexing Bauble. In the leagues that are coming out over the coming weeks, my testing leagues, you'll find me
just dying with a handful of spells, whether they're forces or moxes or whatever it is that I've got, to a single Vexing Bauble, and just adjusting to that card's existence by having cards that cost 1 mana instead of 0. You can either bounce or remove the bauble, or you could bounce or remove the payoff that follows up the bauble, and then cast your Oaths and Show and Tells with bauble in play, and you don't care. Just brought the sideboard up a little bit in the curve as a response to Vexing Bauble. And then I have a bunch of uncounterable removal spells. I don't think I've registered any of these in my previous Oath builds at Eternal Weekends or on the channel. These all just kind of came up recently. I had Dismember, I've tried Cut Down, but the Abrupt Decays and Long Goodbyes. The other big thing that's happening in the format is the Lurrus decks are turning whiter. Dimir Lurrus, I think, is a good matchup, and I'm fine without specific tools for that. But blue-white Lurrus that's going to max out on Containment Priests, you got to kill that card. A lot of the blue-white Lurrus decks also are Oswald, Fiddlebender, Turbo, Time Vault, Voltaic Key combo decks. Abrupt Decay is great against those sort of things. And the Abrupt Decays kill, you guessed it, Vexing Bauble. So those are the flex slots that I went with and my thought process for them. And if we take a moment to just slide over to the BoshNRoll Patreon, for $5 a month, you could have had all of the things I just said 2 days before the tournament. My entire list and my reasoning for it, basically everything I just said written out. Here's Vexing Bauble, Doomsday's a tough matchup, Jewel Shop's tough matchup, my flex slots, Gaia's Blessing or Second Tabernacle, my reasons for main decking Thoughtseize, and my actual list posted days before the tournament. And I do this before every tournament. This Legacy, Vintage, Modern. I have a RCQ coming up. I'll do it for that. And it's there. I share this stuff. If you care to, go find it. That's patreon.com/BoshNRoll. A deck that I really liked for this tournament was Doomsday. But having played a couple leagues with Doomsday, I realized that I would not be able to confidently navigate complicated situations with the deck. The basic piles, the basic play patterns are very simple, but unlike on Magic Online, where if it gets a little weird, you can spend 6 or 8 minutes building a pile that solves for everything. You can't do that in paper, or at least you shouldn't be able to do that in paper. And if your Doomsday opponent is doing that, you should call a judge, because like 60 to 90 seconds tops is what is reasonable to give them to resolve that. You could argue with me about that exact number, but playing your deck within the time capacity of a shared clock is a tested skill in a Magic tournament, and you can't assume that you could just register a combo deck and be like, the game's over one way or another, just let me do my thing. It is not fair for one player to get 8 minutes to make a decision while the other sits and waits as their shared clock runs out, and every judge would agree with me saying that. You can't let Doomsday players do that, and as the Doomsday player, I wasn't going to be the one trying to get away with that, which is what I would have to do if it got complicated, so I just got off Doomsday. I teamed with Justin Gennari for this event. There was a team component of the event as well, and he ended up playing Doomsday, and he and I were talking about this, and I basically shared those exact thoughts with him before the tournament, and I don't think he'll mind me telling the story. I hope he doesn't, because I'm going to. In, I think, round 3, I checked in with him, and he was just kind of sitting across from his opponent. They had all cleaned up their cards already, and they were just sort of chatting. And I was like, hey, what's up? And he was like, yeah, I lost. I made a pile, and I'm not sure if it was an optimal pile, but my opponent and I have been talking about it for 10 minutes, and we can't think of a better one. Like, we haven't solved it between us yet. And in that moment, I was like, okay, so you lost because you couldn't figure out the pile. Now, even removed from the game with no pressure to perform, you still can't figure out the pile. Maybe there was no pile that solved the situation. Maybe it's just extremely complicated and he'll come up with it a week from now. But that's the exact situation that I was not going to play into by choosing Doomsday when I wasn't just a master with the deck. Congrats to the team that came up from Baltimore, by the way, who ended up winning the team portion of the event. It turned out that my team, so going into top 8 of the team portion, my team was in 3rd place. There was a member of the 1st place team and a member of the 2nd place team in the top 8 as well. If both of them lost in the top 8, and I won the tournament, my team could still win. Unfortunately, both of those players won their top 8 matches, which meant my team couldn't win anymore. But I was paired against the person from the Baltimore team who had the lead, and I eliminated him, but his team was still in the lead. But the second team won their way to the finals, and that second team was 1 point behind the Baltimore team. So our final match was actually my opponent playing not only for the Black Lotus, but for his team to win the event. And I was defending the Baltimore team unwittingly. But that was just a cool dynamic to this event as well. I'll talk about some other stuff as we get into the rounds that made this event really cool. But the team dynamic on top of the individual huge prize, big money dynamic is very cool. And with all that said, let's get into the rounds. Welcome to TopDeck.gg, your community's home for everything competitive Magic has to offer. If you're hosting an event, playing for a huge prize, or advertising your events to thousands of players, we've got you covered. Using intuitive pairing software, playing Magic is a breeze. Players just have to sign up online, then scan the QR code in-store. Give competitors the gift of perfect information as their bracket updates in real time. The self-reporting software saves you time and leaves paper match slips in the past. Leave the heavy lifting to TopDeck.gg so your community can relax and focus on playing Magic. It's time to talk about the matches, and if this is your first video tournament report with me, basically I live tweet all my tournaments at BoshNRoll if you want to follow those in real time, and I'm just going to go through that Twitter thread and see what I remember as we go through. The first thing I remember was being so excited for this event. I know I've talked quite a bit about the nostalgia of NYSE and the excitement of me being there and what it would mean to do well at this tournament and everything, but very stoked. And when I made this tweet, I had heard numbers between 95 and 120 for player count. I think it actually ended up being like 105, and that would be 7 rounds of Swiss plus top 8. I was the round 1 feature match. This was streamed on Twitch. If you want to go to twitch.tv/NYSE open. Those VODs are probably available there. The stream producer, Jordan, has reached out to me and said he'll send me the raw files of my feature matches. I might do a voiceover coverage of my own matches again once I get those. They were not prepared in time for me to add them to this video, though, but could be sweet in the future. In that camera match, I beat a Turbo Vault deck. Turbo Vault Key is just any deck that is laser focused on getting Time Vault plus Manifold Key into play. I don't remember much about this match, I'm going to be honest. It was the first of the day, and I remember seeing a Hull Breacher in Game 1. Opponent did not play Luris, which is a dead giveaway. It is weird not to be a Luris deck in Vintage these days, and to not be a Luris deck, but be playing Turbo Vault when you don't have to, would have given away that they're a Hull Breacher deck or that they're able to tinker for Bolas the Citadel, maybe both. But I saw the Hull Breacher and figured that out. I also learned after this round that the event would actually be 8 rounds because a number of buys were awarded. And to fill out a Swiss triangle for buys, there's a math equation. I think it's like 1.5 or 2 players or something per buy awarded. So the 10 people who had buys were worth like 25 people in the event or something like that. Someone, correct my math, but we ended up over the 8-round cut with the phantom players to account for buys, which I thought was ironic because if no buys were awarded, it would have been a 7-round event. And then the players who got buys added a round to the tournament that they then got to skip. So it would have been the same if just nobody had buys and they just all played 7 rounds. Ended up basically being the same path to top 8 for people with buys as if there were nobody with buys. I don't know, very weird. But, I mean, that's just RNG. I'm also noticing, obviously, because the platform has gone to trash, my trending topics over here are rotating, and some of them are very strange. Let's ignore that. Round 2, I was paired against David Lance, who is a known Death and Taxes and Prison Stompy player in Legacy. He is static gripped on the internet, and he beat me in the top 4 of one of the online Eternal weekends. And our top 4 match ended up being the finals because his finals opponent got disqualified for bribery after the event. So although he did play a finals after we played and he lost, he ended up winning Eternal Weekend and getting the painting, which functionally means that our top 4 match was the finals of that tournament in a roundabout way. I just shortcut it to saying it was the finals in my head, but kind of a silly story. But got a little bit of revenge on David. He's also semi-local to me. He's Ohio-based. I'm Western Pennsylvania. So we're in the same local, regional kind of event scenes. Any kind of Legacy 5K, we're both at. Legacy for a duel, we're both at it. So got a little big stage revenge. He was also on Jewel Shops, which is the matchup that I was scared of and the matchup I prepared for. So immediately queuing into somebody extremely competent on a terrible matchup, not where I wanted to be. This match in game 1, I was on the play, and my hand could go land Mox Time Walk, and then land Tinker. So it was functionally a turn 1 Tinker. Like, I could Tinker before he got a turn. And my Tinker resolved, and then I had the choice of getting Null Rod because I knew he was on Jewel Shops, or getting Bolas' Citadel and trying to win on the spot. And I ended up getting Bolas' Citadel, which I still think is correct. My hand just didn't do anything else. It was like 2 lands after the Tinker resolved. If my hand was Oath or Demonic Tutor or just any kind of follow-up, I probably would have gotten the Null Rod and just played it safe, but it wasn't, so I went for the win. The top card of my deck with Bolas' Citadel was just a land. I had to pass the turn without doing anything, and he metamorphed my Bolas' Citadel and caved my skull in immediately. So that's how game 1 went. And game 2, I remember being like kind of quick and smooth in my favor. And then game 3, I made an Atraxa. He copied my Atraxa. I had to bounce his copied Atraxa with Steel Sabotage because Phyrexian Metamorph is still an artifact even after it copies something. And then Thoughtseize it out of his hand in order to show and tell again another Atraxa into play for myself. And then I was able to pull ahead, but only barely. And I felt really lucky to get away with that one. Round 3, I received what would end up being my only loss in the tournament. It was to Blue-White Lurrus. This ended up being my top 4 opponent in the tournament. I didn't see enough of the deck to identify what flavor of Lurrus it was. I thought it was just Blue-White Lurrus Control, like the Lavinia Urza Saga deck, based on what I saw. And really my deck just ate poo this round. Oath is powerful. It's got a lot going on, and the current construction of Oath with the show and tell and the flash on top of the Oath of Druids gives you so much to do with your Atraxas if you draw them, that it's one of the lowest risk Oath decks. But when you have a deck like Show and Tell or Oath of Druids or anything where you could draw your big stupid monster, sometimes that happens. The second Oath of Druids, also not useful. Drawing Show and Tell when you don't have a monster put in, not useful. There's a lot of A-B kind of stuff going on in the deck, and you can just have a bad time. I believe in both games of this match, I kept hands that shoved something early, and then both times it got Force of Willed. And in game 1, opponent was able to assemble Vault Key before I could get anything else going. And game 2, my turn 1 shove involved a Mana Crypt, and I think I just took 12 or 16 or 15 from my own Mana Crypt. I remember being attacked with 1 4/4 construct one time and being dead to that. So that's just, sometimes you flood out on cards that aren't helpful when you choose a deck that has cards that are sometimes unhelpful. In game 1, there was a decision I could have made. My opponent bought their Lurrus, just put it in their hand and passed. And I had Oath of Druids in my hand. And I had perfect information at that point from either a Thoughtseize or a Probe or something that my Oath would resolve. But opponent had no creatures, and I didn't have a Forbidden Orchard to give them one. So my choice was play out the Oath, which functionally locks the Lurrus out of play, because you can't just play Lurrus into Oath. Lurrus is powerful, but it's not more powerful than Atraxa. And if I play the Oath, it locks the Lurrus in hand, and then it gives me time to draw into an Oko or a Forbidden Orchard to give them a creature and force the issue. Or I could let Lurrus resolve, give them basically 2 full turns of Lurrus value. The turn they play it, they get a spell, and then I play Oath, I pass, and then they get another spell. but they have already committed a creature to play, and the Oath is ready to go right away. I decided to take the safe route of just locking the Lurrus in hand when I knew my Oath would resolve, and opponent just had more gas than me from there. So the blue-white Lurrus decks are full of gas. They have Lorien Revealed, Ancestral Recall, they play cantrips, they play Mishra's Bauble, they have all sorts of rebuys and ways to pull ahead. Just Urza Saga itself, tutoring your Vault Key win. I bet on top decks and I lost that bet. This round, I also remember feeling physically bad before I sat down for the round. Like, breakfast was wearing off and I needed more energy. And that's going to come up later. But after this round, I lost very quickly. I think I had like 38 minutes left out of the 50 to go do something else. I went and got a sub, I got some chips, I got a drink, I took some time to myself, got some food in me, and I was feeling much better after this round. In round 4, I played against a fan of the channel who was also on Oath. He was actually chatting to me right before the round. He was like, yeah, I just took a loss. It was the Oath Mirror. I'm not super confident in the Oath Mirror. And we just started chatting a little bit about the Oath Mirror, though I didn't reveal that I was on Oath specifically. Though as a supporter of the channel, he obviously knew that I had played the deck to some success in the past. And then we immediately got paired into each other. Like, pairings were up. I was like, okay, good luck. And I walked to my chair, and then there he was. He was like, nope, it's me. And the Oath Mirror is a weird one because Oath of Druids and Show and Tell are both symmetrical. And you both have all the same setups in the form of Oko and Forbidden Orchard. And you have all the same payoffs in the form of Atraxa. So basically, unless you have Forbidden Orchard plus Oko superiority to the point where you can pump more creatures into play than they can pump back into your side, or you have to Thoughtseize or probe their hand before you cast Show and Tell to know if the coast is clear, you can end up with just uncastable spells. Like, you cannot just run Oath out off of 2 lands that aren't Forbidden Orchard and hope for later, which is how you play a lot of matchups. You just put it out there. It locks creatures out of their play pattern, like they just can't cast any creature in their hand, and you've got Forbidden Orchard in your deck somewhere. That is the play pattern in all non-Oath matchups. But in the Oath Mirror, if you play an Oath and then they play a Forbidden Orchard, you lose. So you just have to be super cagey about those. We played a super back and forth game 1, where basically my opponent was hellbent, and so was I. And we were both just kind of in a top deck war. And then I drew 3 Oaths in a row that I couldn't play because I didn't have an Orchard. And opponent drew like Demonic Tutor for Yawgmoth's Will, which then buried me. So I learned that they're on a Yawgmoth's Will build of Oath, and then we were going to go to sideboard games and see, how not confident in the Oath Mirror they really were. And I boarded out 3 of my Oaths and 2 of my Show and Tells, and I board up in Oko, I board in a bunch of control stuff, and really I just tutor for the Oath if I have the coast clear, or I'm set up appropriately to do it, or I focus on Tinker to win. As we were sideboarding for game 2, opponent was like kind of bemoaning, like, oh, I don't even know what deck you are, because I really only showed like blue, green, and black lands, and then vintage spells. I never showed him an Oath, never showed him an Orchard, never saw an Atraxa. And so I was pretty sure he would not be off of the Oath package going into game 2, and that I could leverage that. And that is what happened. He played an Oath. I played Forbidden Orchard from my hand. I triggered off his Oath, and we went to game 3 pretty quickly. And then he knew the Oath Mirror was what he was doing now, but I noticed he did not go back into his sideboard and board out 5 more cards. So I knew he was still trying to Oath into the mirror. And our game got really slow and grindy and interesting, and I resolved an early Oko, which is one of the ways you break the mirror. And my opponent clearly didn't have anything going on in his hand. He had 2 cards, and then he drew for turn, played Black Lotus, and I saw him count to 7. He was just like 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And I was like, well, he's going to cast an Atraxa here. I'm going to get buried. I can elk the Atraxa, but it's already going to look at 10 cards, and I'm going to be so far behind at this point. And then he just passed the turn instead, which I felt very lucky about. I thought he was playing around Counterspell, like he was worried about me just forcing his Atraxa and him doing nothing. And then on the following turn, he spent 7 mana but cast Sarah's Emissary, not Atraxa, and he named Planeswalker. So him and his creatures had protection from Planeswalkers. Then it went back to my turn, and I elked his Mox Ruby, which between the Mox Ruby and the Sarah's Emissary, now he had more creatures than me, and his Oath triggered, and I got an Atraxa, and then I was able to pull ahead from there. And after the game, I was like, oh man, when you counted to 7, I thought I was just dead to Atraxa. And he was like, yeah, but you would have just stole it with Oko. And he didn't know that Oko's third ability, to exchange an artifact for a creature, the creature has to have 3 or less power. He thought I could just give him a food and I get his Atraxa. So there was some preparation issues and not understanding what the Oath Mirror is really about. And then there was also just did not fully know what the cards in his own deck did, which is, tough. I mean, he was embarrassed about it. Like, he was like, oh no, wow, really? And like, those are the type of mistakes or a type of lessons you don't want to learn when there's a Black Lotus on the line. And I'm not trying to rag on my opponent. I'm sure he agrees with that statement and feels bad that that was where he learned that. And then we talked about sideboarding a little bit, and he showed me that he boarded out his whole Tinker package. And I showed him that I'm all in on the Tinker package, and my Oaths and Show and Tells are mostly out of the deck at this point. And we just got to have that conversation. Round 5, I got paired into a Beseech the Mirror, Dark Ritual, Storm, Time Vault deck. I knew that's what the matchup was because I had been looking around between rounds and looking at who was next to me when I was playing. You should definitely do that, by the way, especially as you start winning and your pool of potential opponents gets smaller. You should know at least vaguely what's around you, if not actually making a list in your phone, like your phone notepad, like white shirt, blue hat, Oath of Druids. Like, even if you don't know their names, like, you can scout a tournament field. It's not illegal, and it's very helpful, especially in a powerful format like Vintage. But I had seen my opponent earlier. I knew what he was doing, and I was able, because I knew the matchup, game 1, I kept a hand that was like green Mox, red Mox, Force of Will, Force of Will, Force of Negation, some other blue card. And my hand didn't do anything, but it didn't lose on turn 1. Like, that was for sure. And honestly, I ran really good. Like, I forced 2 things like I had to, and then I drew an Oath pretty quickly that I could cast off my green Mox. And then shortly after that, I found Forbidden Orchard just naturally, and I was able to trigger Atraxa, and off we go. And then game 2, I don't remember all the details, but I remember having a really good back and forth game where I think I played both of my Thoughtseizes and a Nature's Claim, and just all of those construction flex slots came up, and it ended up being really good. I think the end of the game, I had like Force of Will blue card, Force of Vigor green card in hand, and I had a Sensei's Top in play that was floating a Mindbreak Trap on top of the deck. So I knew I was like pretty safe from anything by the end, and just all of his deck building choices, and that was the second terrible matchup I beat on the day. Round 6 was another camera match. That VOD is out there somewhere. It was against Esper Luris. This matchup is fine to me. It's one that I understand that they have the tools to beat, but also they're a deck that needs to put a creature into play to win most of the time, which gives Oath an advantage there. My opponent game 1 kept a hand that was extremely powerful, but extremely greedy. It was like a Urza Saga off-color Mox kind of start with maybe a Force of Will, and then a bunch of black cards, but no black sources. And I Gitaxian probed and saw what was going on there, so I knew to kind of prioritize interaction that would stop him from finding black mana. And I ended up winning game 1. I don't think he really cast spells. Game 2, he had a Grafdigger's Cage in play, and I got to do one of my favorite tricks, which is if your opponent has a Grafdigger's Cage in play, you can still Oath, and you can mill cards until you hit a creature. Then you put all the revealed cards into the graveyard, but the creature stays on top of the deck because that's where it is when Oath tries to put it into play. But Grafdigger's Cage says that can't come into play. So it does as much as it can, which is move the creature to the top of your deck. And then that happens your upkeep, so you could draw for turn, and it's the creature you just Oathed into. And then you could show and tell or flash it into play from your hand. It's basically a ugly vampiric tutor for Atraxa. And I fired Oath into Grafdigger's Cage, picked up an Atraxa, show and telled an Atraxa from my hand. Opponent had Swords to Plowshares to clear that Atraxa, but that Atraxa hit another show and tell, and then I was able to Oath into the cage again next turn to find an Atraxa to pay out that show and tell, and that second Atraxa got the game won. I promised I'd talk about other cool stuff that Nick Detweiler did to make this event awesome. These are the packs left over from a crazy draft that happened. These are sets from Ice Age to Onslaught, old school drafts, and this was free for anyone who dropped from the tournament to get involved in. There were enough for 8 players, but if you dropped from the tournament, you got a free raffle ticket, and 8 people who just had a bad morning got to do this for free. Just incredible stuff. My understanding is it was a tough beat on value, though. I think a Rhystic Study was opened as the most valuable card out of all these packs. Just horrible, horrible value. If you're one of those people who goes to the LGS and spends like $60 on a pack of Tempest, stop it. Stop it. That is degenerate gambling, and it's not good for you. Stop. Buy singles. But I imagine drafting this was very cool for free. But if you had to pay the money to do this, and out of all of these old, like $1,000 worth of packs, a Rhystic Study came out, you'd be so mad. It's unhealthy. Knock it off. Round 7 of the event, I paired into Doomsday, which is another one of the terrible matchups. Probably the worst one, would be my guess. If I had to rank all of my bad matchups, I think I said something to that effect earlier. And I don't really have any strong, exciting memories about this match. I think it was a pretty nuts and bolts, like, I countered 2 win attempts game 1, and then an Atraxa showed up. He dumpstered me game 2, and then I countered some win attempts. Game 3, I remember it coming down to life totals. Like, I remember passing my last turn with him at 4, which means that he can't use Street Wraith if he Doomsdays, because Doomsday puts you to 2, and then you can't Wraith to jumpstart the pile. And I think my shields were down, but his life total was under major stress, and then he cycled a Street Wraith going to 2, and that cycled Street Wraith drew another Street Wraith, and he couldn't cycle that one, and that was that. And that was my 3 worst matchups, like Dark Ritual, Beseech Storm decks, Jewel Shops, and Doomsday, all defeated on my way through this tournament. Felt good. Didn't get scared off my deck choice because there were some bad matchups out there, and my deck construction helped in all of them. I definitely Thoughtseize this opponent at least once. I do remember that. Because he was playing with the Secret Lair foil Doomsdays from that famous artist, and I remember looking at them and taking them away. Then round 8, it says 7-1-1. I added both a win and a draw to my record, but it's 6-1-1. I drew with Adam. Adam is somebody I know from various Magic around the region. Cool dude, very happy to shake hands with someone I like. And we both locked at least a Mox for the day. Not a bad place to be in. The BoshNRoll channel is proudly partnered with the Resleevables.
Good. All right, here we go, gang.
In this YouTube series, hosts Cedric Phillips and Patrick Sullivan take us on a set-by-set journey through the good, the bad, and the ugly of Magic's history. Each episode is a focused deep dive into the facts about a set's design and release, the Magic lore expressed through the cards in that set, Tournament Edition gameplay videos featuring products and Pro Tour decks of the era, an award show that shouts out the best and weirdest cards of the set, and a final grade for the set's overall success. Whether you want a history lesson or a nostalgia hit, The Resleevables has it at youtube.com/theresleevables. With the top 8 locked, I made it a point to refuel myself physically because it had been a long day, and I mentioned back in round 3 that I had felt kind of bad, ate some food, felt a lot better. I had felt good up to this point, and I wanted to make sure I kept feeling good. I went upstairs to the hotel bar, and I saw that they had this quinoa avocado vegetable fried egg bowl, and it's like, yep, that's the kind of good power that I want. I had some other gamers up there hanging out, eating these fantastic looking burgers and fries, but that was not the kind of energy that I wanted. That might slow me down. I didn't want to have to need the bathroom in 45 minutes right before my top 8 match. And this thing hit the spot and kept me going, which is going to come up very quickly. In the top 8, I was against Doomsday. At this point, lists were open, so I knew what my opponent was on and everything. I stole game 1 somehow. This is all on camera. All my top 8 matches are on camera if you want to go find the VODs. I won game 1. I'm pretty sure Thoughtseize was involved, and I think I tinkered for an early Bolas's Citadel, like fended off one attempt from them and then shoved a Bolas's Citadel and just ran away with it. Game 2 is where things get really interesting. We went back and forth. Wait, no, he didn't. It was a turn. They turn 2'd me on the play. Okay, we did not go back and forth. I had a hand that had Black Mox, Irrelevant Mox, Fetch Land, Forbidden Orchard, Ancestral Recall, Vampiric Tutor. So no counterspell, but Ancestral Recall is a double weapon against Doomsday because you could just Ancestral yourself and have a bunch of good cards. Or you can Ancestral them when their deck's empty and they die. So Doomsday, the pile has to be able to beat my Ancestral. And I had the Vamp Tutor, where if they don't turn to me right away, I can Vamp for Flusterstorm to protect my Ancestral. And then if they ever try to go for a win, I just deck them with backup. That was my plan. But then they went off immediately. They had kind of a low resource Doomsday Resolve. And I think they had like 2 cards left in hand at the end of the Doomsday. And then they cycled Street Wraith, which drew, they might have been holding the Gush. Sorry, the details are a little fuzzy. But they resolved Doomsday and then immediately gushed. Yeah, they must have just had Gush in hand because it's important that they have exactly 3 cards in their deck for the next part. So yeah, they must have just gushed from hand. And then they played Black Lotus, sacked the Lotus for blue, targeting themselves with Ancestral Recall with blue floating. So the 2 cards on top of the pile that they just picked up with Gush were Lotus, Ancestral. And then I'm in the spot where I can't target them with Ancestral now because then they just draw the same 3 cards that they want to draw, and they use the Flusterstorm that I had deduced was in the pile by looking at their exile to just counter their Ancestral. Then they cast Thassa's Oracle. So whether it's my Ancestral or theirs doesn't matter. I can't let them draw 3 right now. So my options are Ancestral myself, try to find a counterspell, or hope they mess up. And what I ended up going with was I let their Ancestral resolve. They had blue floating, which is exactly enough to cast Thassa's Oracle. So if they just cast Thassa's Oracle from here, they can't fluster. But then they had Mox Sapphire. So they actually built the perfect pile. A great job from my opponent to my opponent for that. With blue floating, they cast Mox Sapphire, which now represents blue for Oracle with Fluster backup. And I responded to the Mox Sapphire with my Vampiric Tutor, because I know they have Flusterstorm in hand at this point, and I'm like, I just have to put something on the stack. Maybe they freak out and fluster, even though it doesn't really make sense to fluster a Vamp Tutor there. But I just had to try to do something or else I was going to lose. So I cast the Vamp Tutor. Opponent immediately says it resolves. Doesn't even think about it. Just, yep, that's okay. And okay, shit, that didn't work. And then I went into my deck. I was just kind of bantering with my opponent, like, yeah, I was hoping you'd counter that. You didn't fall for it, though. And then I just put my deck down without even choosing a card for Vamp Tutor. And then I cracked the fetch land in play. I was like, Vamp resolves. It doesn't matter. Now I'm going to fetch. I'm just going to fetch away whatever I tutor for. I'm so dumb. And opponent was like, yeah, okay, sure. And then I searched for a land that could cast Ancestral. And I just pointed my Ancestral at them. It was like, Ancestral you. And he goes, damn, you got it. And he conceded, just shook my hand, started picking up his cards. And I was like, wait, where's your Flusterstorm? How did that work? And he's like, I have it, but I can't cast it right now because I don't have the blue. And in that moment where I had Vamp Tutored, then fetched, and then we had a little conversation, he just forgot he had blue floating, even though it was what he had built his entire line around. And remember this big bowl of quinoa avocado that I just ate? I bet my opponent was running on kind of fumes here. And I'm in the Matrix, just putting random shit on the stack to make them think about other stuff than the obvious win that they have. And they're in the abyss of, oh no, I've been outmaneuvered somehow. Would I have won this game if they just ate one of these? Probably not. But something happened somewhere in there. Long day, tough tournament. Maybe they're tired. Maybe they're hungry. Maybe a lot of things. But my lethal spell resolved through their Flusterstorm and mana to cast it. And I was on to the top 4. Important lesson learned there. I did make sure to check in with my opponent. He was just sort of like sitting there staring at his cards as I picked up all mine. And I was like, are you okay? That was tough. And he was like, yeah, I mean, I won a Mox. I'm still pretty happy, but yeah, that was wild. And just kind of long day. We've all been there. In college, I lost a nationals invite. I was playing for a nationals invite at regionals, and in the top 8 of the tournament, I cast a Slaughter Pact on an opponent's creature that didn't even matter, and then got to my upkeep and realized I didn't have black mana. I had like 6 lands in play, including a Reflecting Pool, and they could just not make black between them. And it's because I hadn't eaten all day. Basically the same thing that just happened here. And, learn from that shit. Eat something like this. In the top 4, I got rematched versus the only loss I had in the tournament up to that point. This one also on camera. My memory's a little hazy on our first 2 games. I'm pretty sure Thoughtseize was involved and like collapsed a draw engine, and then he had to kind of play fair that I was able to jockey ahead of. There might have been a Bolas' Citadel involved. Honestly, sorry, I don't remember. Wish I could do better for you. Game 3, though, was the interesting one. Game 3, my hand had an early Oath of Druids in it. Like, I think it was Landmark's Oath on turn 1. And my opponent had a full hand of cards. I know his list has 3 Containment Priests in it. And this is the first test. Like, if he hesitates at all or fights over the Oath, I can read he doesn't have Priest. If he doesn't seem worried about Oath at all, I'm going to read that he does have Priest. My hand has Abrupt Decay in it. So I'm like kind of hoping my Oath resolves without a fight, and then I could just pick off the Priest later and sneak it through. So my Oath resolves without a fight, and I read, okay, that means Containment Priest. Opponent has Containment Priest, to the surprise of nobody. And then we just start wiggling back and forth for position, and at some point I draw Bolas' Citadel to go with the Show and Tell. I cast the Show and Tell, and this is a moment where you could mess up. Like, if you're way ahead with a Containment Priest and your opponent who is falling behind casts Show and Tell, there's a couple thoughts that might go through your head here. 1, Containment Priest beats this. Why would I care? 2, this is a desperate play. There's nothing that could come into play here. They're just trying to fish a counterspell out of my hand. 3, they have the one of Bolas' Citadel in hand. And opponent played it tight, and they did counter the Show and Tell, and I did have the Bolas' Citadel in hand. And then opponent got to kind of pull ahead. Like, Wastelands were keeping me off my Abrupt Decay for a while. I had Basic Island in play and some off-color mocks that didn't help me cast the Abrupt Decay, so I was kind of locked behind the Priest despite having removal in my hand. And then opponent found a Haywire Might, and they cycled Lore and Revealed for a Tropical Island, so they can remove my Oath whenever they want. And I get to a spot where, my opponent also has Time Vault in play tapped, and Urza Saga on 2. This is it. They pass with Saga on 2, Haywire Might in play, green mana up, Containment Priest in play, and a hand with some number of cards in it. So I go to my turn, and I draw, I think it was Forbidden Orchard, which suddenly lets me cast Long Goodbye that I've picked up somewhere along the game. But my upkeep's already passed, and I'm going to die if I pass the turn. So I've also picked up a Time Walk that I've been saving, and I cast Time Walk, and I put like just a small amount of Hollywood in it, where it's just like Time Walk, I guess. And he lets it resolve without even thinking about it. And when the Time Walk resolved, I recognized that he was not going to use Haywire Might either. My opponent was already thinking about the finals in that moment. And I was like, okay, this is going to work. And I was like, yeah, just go to my walk turn. And then we went to my walk turn, and I said, Oath triggers in response, Long Goodbye your Containment Priest. And my opponent just kind of deflated in his chair, realized what had happened. He had Haywire Might and a green mana up, and he was about to get Atraxa'd. And get Atraxa'd he did, and made a little bit of a fight out of it after that, like found an Ancestral Recall off of a Merchant Scroll, tried to dig for the Caracas, but couldn't find it, and I was just set up and managed to turn it back around at the very end. So in that spot, I lose if Time Walk gets countered, I lose if Haywire Might gets activated, I lose if any of the cards in his hand is another Containment Priest, but none of those things happened. And once again, we scroll up to my big avocado quinoa bowl and how I'm in the zone. I'm properly fueled. I don't know what my opponent's story was, but I don't think I win my top 8 match, and I don't think I win my top 4 match 3 or 4 hours earlier in the day where everyone is more awake and feeling better. Both of these players played really well, did everything they were supposed to do up until the last tiny little moment where it mattered, and something in their brain just did not activate in that moment. And I don't think either of them are bad players. I don't think either of them didn't consider the line, because my first opponent made the perfect pile. My second opponent tutored the Haywire Might, tutored the Tropical Island to activate it, then just simply did not do it. Something broke down in these two players in those last moments where I stayed sharp and they didn't. And sometimes that's all it takes to sneak through. And then the final round of the tournament, this was where that team event culminated. The Baltimore team didn't drive home because they were waiting to see if they won the team event, even though their whole team was eliminated. My opponent's team was standing behind him. There was more on the line than really even applied to me, but it was cool that that second storyline got to be built into this cool moment anyway. My opponent was on a Lurrus Turbo Vault. Though my previous round opponent, the Lurrus shell can be built to be just full control or full control with Vault Key, and then it can become kind of Turbo Vault Key, and then it can become very Turbo Vault Key. And my finals opponent, Hank, was very Turbo Vault Key. He had stuff like Mox Opals, and my top 4 opponent had 2 Paradoxical Outcomes. Hank had 3 in the finals. Like, he was just more in on comboing, which on the one side means his sideboard didn't have a bunch of Containment Priests in it. He was softer to my Oaths and Show and Tell kind of stuff. But on the other hand, he's one of these fast combo decks that I don't really want to play against. Though this type of fast combo that uses artifacts versus my Null Rod deck, I'm much more comfortable with this than like a Dark Ritual Doomsday kind of situation. This game, our game 1, once again, on camera, game 1 was just a perfect kind of storm of high power magical bullshit that came together. I was on the play, and I had my 1 of Cataxian Probe. It's restricted. You only get 1 of those. I paid 2 life and saw his hand. And I saw that he had kept a hand with Urza's Saga, Sol Ring, Lorien Revealed for mana. And then a bunch of blue cards, none of which was a counterspell. There was like an Ancestral Recall, a Dig Through Time. Like, it was very powerful stuff, but it was not a counterspell. And it all relied on getting that Lorien Revealed cycled before it could do anything. And so I like assess the situation. My hand has, I think, an early Oath or early Show and Tell. Oh no, it's Tinker. It's Tinker. That's important, because that's where the game continues to get weird. I think it's turn 2 Tinker lined up, and I realize he doesn't have a counter spell. So I'm like, okay, I'll just go with my turn 2 Tinker and hope he doesn't draw a counter spell in the one turn where he could. But then my Probe draws Strip Mine. I play 1 of those as well, also restricted, and I don't play Wasteland. And I realized that Urza's Saga has a trigger where that trigger has to resolve before it can tap for mana. So if I strip mine the Saga before it learns how to make mana, then he can't cast Sol Ring and he can't cycle Lorien Revealed. And that gives me the option now to commit to my turn 2 Tinker plan, or just sit the strip mine in play and hope that he doesn't draw any other mana source. Like, can't draw any Mox, can't draw any other land, or else the strip mine is super embarrassing. But if he just draws like a spell, the strip mine is the nuts. So I just park strip mine in play and pass the turn, and he draws for turn, kind of rolls his eyes, plays the Saga. I waste it or strip it in response to the trigger, and he just passes the turn. And then Now I have a turn 3 Tinker because I spent turn 1 doing that instead of making a mana. So like he has an extra draw step to find a Force of Will or a blue land that gets the thing going, but he just doesn't. He goes draw go for the next 2 turns. Then I shove a Tinker. He did not draw a Force either. My Tinker resolves, I get Bolas' Citadel. And then the game gets even weirder. So I've got Bolas' Citadel in play versus an opponent with no counter spells in their hand and no permanents. Easy game, right? Apparently not, because my Bolas' Citadel, it ran up to a Force of Will, then I had to stop because I couldn't clear that from the top of my deck. So I passed the turn. I could pay 5 life to force anything if he draws anything, but he just goes to discard and passes it back, still no permanents. My Bolas' Citadel runs again into a Force of Will. I have to pass again. And he once again misses and goes to discard. And then my Bolas' Citadel runs into a Show and Tell, where I do have an Atraxa in my hand, but I know he has a Dress Down from the early Gitaxian Probe. That was one of the blue cards in his hand that he can't cast. So if I Show and Tell, I get a 7/7 into play, but it doesn't draw me any cards. And his Dress Down gets to draw him a card where he is just like 1 mana source away from unlocking and maybe making this competitive. But I figure with the 2 Force of Wills now in my hand that I've run into and then had to draw over the last 2 turns with Citadel, I'm pretty safe to do this and I got to kill him somehow. So I cast the Show and Tell off the top of my deck. I put in Atraxa, he puts in Dress Down. The Bolas' Citadel runs out of gas again, like back-to-back lands or something that I can't just keep going. And I pass with my vanilla 7/7 in play, Dress Down burns off, and opponent, again, goes to discard and passes it back. Like the Dress Down draw plus draw step still can't cycle this Lorien Revealed that he's got in his hand, still can't get the Ancestral off the ground. And then Atraxa in for 7, Bolas' Citadel bricks, Atraxa in for 7, Bolas' Citadel bricks. And I think with 8 life left, so 2 Atraxa attacks, Hank finds mana and starts casting spells. And like, well, if there is a, I think he had 1 main deck Swords to Plowshares. Like if he could clear this Atraxa, he's kind of back to stability. The hand's obviously gas. It's been super sculpted this whole time because he's just been drawing and discarding. So the 7 cards in hand are all good. They're all spells. And it got a little dicier at the very end, but I did end up using all the counter spells that I had run into earlier to fend it off and just get over the finish line. But that game was super weird. Game 2 was much less interesting. I kept a hand that had like some acceleration, an Ancestral Recall, and a Tinker. And he saw all of that. And I had like a turn 1 end of turn Ancestral Recall that he had to counter. And then I untapped and played Tinker, and that resolved. And then my Bolas' Citadel just ran amok. I think it ran into, I think I only hit 2 spells. It was Abrupt Decay, whatever your scariest permanent is, and then flip Atraxa. And I was immediately gassed up and won the game pretty easily from there. And that's how we ended up here, holding the Mighty Atlas Trophy, the Altered Karn, and the Black Lotus. NYSE champion. Shout out once again to Nick Detweiler. Follow him for future NYSE updates or feedback from this event. He didn't need to give away 8 pieces of Power 9 in a Magic tournament. Nobody needs to do that. That's an insane undertaking. But he did it, and it succeeded. Shout out to the vintage community for coming out and supporting a wild swing like this. When we show up for stuff like this, it's more likely to happen again. Also, shout out to Nick for being a great host. He was very generous and hospitable, having me stay with him for this event as well. He is generously taking time out of his schedule to mail me my big stupid trophy that was too big to fit in my suitcase that he designed. And Nick also did all that other stuff, like this Altered Karn that I got for winning. Didn't need to do that. I'm already getting a Black Lotus. This incredible trophy, didn't need to do that. There's already a Black Lotus. There was that draft that was for free, that incredible vintage crazy draft that he didn't need to do, but he did. There was another Altered Karn given out for best sportsmanship in the event. He didn't need to do that, but he did. Just incredible host. Puts on a great show. Follow Nick for future updates. And that's me signing off here. You will see my testing leagues running up to this. You already know the result, but you will see me like, okay, I don't really want to play Oath in NYSE. I'm going to try Doomsday. And you'll see a couple leagues like that. And luckily, when I recorded them last week, I had the awareness to say, you're watching this from the future and you'll already know what I ended up on and how I did. But obviously, best possible outcome here. Everybody, thanks for following. Remember, if you want my deck and my format thoughts before big tournaments like this, I give them out on Patreon every time. Go get that. You don't need to be surprised. And I'm always playing Eternal Magic right here on this YouTube channel. Remember to like, comment, subscribe, check out that Patreon, and I'll see you next time.